Welcome to another exciting episode of YuGiOh Deck Talk. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Fluffal Frightfur deck build that I've been messing around with at locals. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the cards involved here. So first we have Fluffal Bear. I like to run 3 of these. This card is great to get out your toy vendor card, which really gets that draw power moving. So this effect is you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, set 1 toy vendor directly from your deck to your spell and trap zone. You contribute this card, then target 1 polymerization in your graveyard, add it to your hand. You can only use 1 Fluffal Bear effect per turn, and only once that turn. So this is important. You'd really like to see that one in your first hand if you don't have a toy vendor in your hand already. Really great card to have, and goes well with the next card here, Fluffal Wings. If this card is in your graveyard and you control toy vendor, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 1 Fluffal monster in your graveyard and banish it. If you do, draw 1 card, then you could send 1 toy vendor you control to the graveyard. And if you do, draw 1 card. You can only use this effect of Fluffal Wings once per turn. So ideally, you really want to have a Fluffal Bear and a Fluffal Wings in your hand at the same time too, because you could get that Fluffal Wings into your graveyard and then banish it in your Fluffal Bear. Thus, you'll end up actually getting quite a few cards in your hand that way. So, one of the better combos out of this deck. Next monster we have is Fluffal Dog. This is your Searcher card. When this card is normal or special summoned from the hand, you can add 1 Edge Imp Sabers or Fluffal monster from your deck to your hand, except Fluffal Dog. You can only use this effect of Fluffal Dog once per turn. So another really great card to have. I try to run 3 of these as well. Next up, I have Edge Imp Sabers. And if this card is in your graveyard, you can place 1 card from your hand on the top of your deck. Special summon this card in defense position. You can only use this effect of Edge Imp Sabers once per turn. I've seen a few people run 2 of these. I've seen a few people run 1 of these. It's really up to your preference. This card is one that can keep on popping out of your graveyard by using its effect if you need to for multiple fusions. So I like to run a few of these in the deck as well. Really important to have for your extra deck, really. Next up I have Fluffal Owl. I like to run at least 1 of these in my deck as well, in case you're in a pinch and you need a good alternative to polymerization or any of your other fusion cards. Its effect is when this card is normal or special summoned from the hand, you can add 1 polymerization from your deck to your hand. You can pay 500 life points, fusion summon 1 Frightfur Fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as fusion materials. You can only use 1 Fluffal Owl effect per turn, and only once that turn. So, say you're running low on your polymerizations, this is a good alternative if you have 500 life points to pay. So, I do like Fluffal Owl. I know some people are on the fence about that one. Next, we have Fluffal Penguin. During your main phase, you can special summon 1 Fluffal monster from your hand except Fluffal Penguin. This effect can only be used once while this card is face up on the field. If this card is sent to the graveyard as fusion material for a fusion summon of a Frightfur Fusion monster, you can draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card. You can only use this effect of Fluffal Penguin once per turn. So, really like this one as well, especially if you're using it as one of your fusion materials. It's another great way to keep drawing cards out of your deck. Really good card to have. Next, I have Edge Imp Chain. When this card declares an attack, you can add 1 Edge Imp Chain from your deck to your hand. If this card is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, you can add 1 Frightfur card from your deck to your hand. You can only use 1 Edge Imp Chain effect per turn, and only once that turn. I like this card a lot, especially when you use it as fusion material or anything like that. Once it hits your graveyard, you could always come back and search a Frightfur Fusion or any of the other Frightfur magic cards as well that you may be wanting to use. I tend to use that a lot. If I already use polymerization for fusion, then I can always remove some cards from a graveyard and banish using the Frightfur Fusion. Get at least another Frightfur monster onto the field as well. Edge Imp Chain really helps you load the field, so to speak. Next, I have Fluffal Octopus. When this card is normal or special summoned, you can target 1 Fluffal or Edge Imp monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. If this card is sent to the graveyard as fusion material for a fusion summon of a Frightfur Fusion monster, you can target up to 2 of your banished monsters. Return them to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of Fluffal Octopus once per turn. This card's fantastic if you're trying to get a few cards out of your out of your banished summon back into your graveyard. Prime example would be the Fluffal Wings and the Fluffal Bear, or anything like that, especially Fluffal Wings. If you have another toy vendor out on the field, it'd be a great thing to have another Fluffal Wings sit in your graveyard so you could reactivate its effect and hopefully get some more draw power out of that as well. What else we got here? We got Fluffal Cat. I like to run one of these in the deck as well. If this card is sent to the graveyard as a fusion material for a fusion summon, you can target one polymerization in your graveyard and add it to your hand. You can only use this effect of Fluffal Cat once per turn. So it's a great way to get your polymerizations back in your hands. Kind of great way to recycle that card. So really enjoy having a Fluffal Cat in the deck as well. Just for my use, I like to have at least a copy or two of King of the Swamp in the deck as well. If you aren't familiar with King of the Swamp, its effect is that this card can be used as a substitute for any one fusion material whose name is specifically listed on the fusion monster card, but the other fusion materials must be correct. You can discard this card to the graveyard and add one polymerization from your deck to your hand. So its second effect is very similar to that initial effect that Fluffal Owl has as well. So it's another searcher to get a polymerization in your hand, but I tend to use this one more as another fusion material when I have a polymerization in the hand. Excellent card. Highly recommend that one. As you probably well know for just about any fusion deck, so this card is a great utility tool. Next, we're going to go into some of the magic cards, the spell cards that I have in here. So, of course, 3 polymerizations. If you don't know what that does, it fusion summons one fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. Of course, you gotta have those. Next is probably the most important card, especially when you're trying to get your draw power going, is this toy vendor card. So it is a spell card that allows you to, once per turn, you can discard one card, draw one card, and show it. Then if it's a Fluffal monster, you can special summon one monster from your hand. Otherwise, discard the card that you drew. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you could add one Edge Imp Sabers or one Fluffal monster from your deck to your hand. This comes into play very handy, especially if you're using your effect from your Fluffal Wings. So once this card gets discarded, you could search out any Fluffal monster and really get your strategy going, or of course Edge Imp Sabers. So excellent card to have in there. Run 3 of those at least, for sure. So next up, I run at least 1 or 2 Frightfur Fusions here. Fusion summon one Frightfur Fusion monster from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from your field or graveyard. You can only activate 1 Frightfur Fusion per turn. It could be not so advantageous to have 3 copies of Frightfur Fusion, especially because you can only use this effect once per turn, so you don't really want to load your hand with multiple copies of this card, since you really only get to use once per turn. What I like to do as well is I like to run Fusion Recycling Plant. Once per turn, you can discard 1 card, add 1 polymerization from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Once per turn during the end phase, you could target 1 monster in your graveyard that was used as fusion material for a fusion summon this turn and add it to your hand. So, just another way to keep those polymerizations coming no matter where they are. That's why I love this card a lot. It doesn't matter if it's in your graveyard or if it's in your deck. It also allows you to remove unneeded cards from your hand as well, or cards that you want to see in your graveyard from your hand, such as, of course, Fluffal Wings. So, you see the trend here. Definitely love this card as well. I also like to run a few copies of Instant Fusion in here for a few reasons, but its effect is you pay 1,000 life points, special summon 1 level 5 or lower fusion monster from your fusion deck. This special summon is treated as a fusion summon. The fusion monster special summoned by this effect cannot attack and is destroyed during the end phase. Only 1 instant fusion can be activated per turn. This card is very important if you're trying to get some good combos off, especially starting with a Frightfur Sheep that you eventually want to use as material for your Frightfur Sabertooth. And we'll get into the extra deck in a second, but also too, another good combination that I see in quite a few decks is using this instant fusion to get out your Elder Entity Norden, to also get another level 4 monster out of your graveyard, to then XE summon whatever card that you really want to use. So this card has multiple uses, extremely helpful, and definitely want to run a few copies of that in your deck as well. I also have a few copies of Frightfur Factory. You could banish one polymerization spell card or fusion spell card from your graveyard except Diffusion Wave Motion. Fusion summon one Frightfur monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or side of the field as fusion materials. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one of your banished Frightfur Fusion and add it to your hand. You can only use this effect to Frightfur Factory once per turn. So, pretty self-explanatory there. And last but not least, at least for my sake, I like to carry a copy of Regeki. So, moving on to the extra deck. This is where all the magic happens. We're trying to get these combos off and trying to fuse as many monsters as we can for different reasons, but some of the monsters have excellent effects. That's why I really like this deck. Depending on where you're at in your match, certain Frightfur monsters really come into play to help you out. First off, I'd like to take a look at Frightfur Tiger. It's a fusion monster that requires an Edge Imp Sabers and one or more Fluffal monsters. When this card is fusion summoned, you can target cards on the field up to the number of fusion materials used for its fusion summon. Destroy them. All Frightfur monsters you control gain 300 attack for each Fluffal monster and Frightfur monster you control. You can only control one Frightfur Tiger. So, say for example your opponent has, I don't know, say they set 3 cards in their spell and trap zone. Maybe they also have a field spell card out there. Then you really want to knock out their back row. Well, if you got enough Fluffal monsters and you have an Edge Imp Sabers lying around, or even a King of the Swamp hanging in there, you could use 4 different monsters, fuse them together, and Frightfur Tiger's effect activates where you could basically level the whole back row there. Extremely useful, and especially when you start loading your board, this monster is great to really boost all of your other Frightfur monsters' attacks. So, moving on, also have a Frightfur Wolf. This one is one that could be crucial for really getting those one-turn kills, those OTKs. This one requires an Edge Imp Sabers and one or more Fluffal monster, must be fusion summoned with the above fusion materials, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. This card can attack a number of times each battle phase up to the number of fusion materials used for its fusion summon. So, by default, it already attacks twice because you need 2 fusion materials. But if you're ready to close out the game, you think you got a clear shot to win it, use more monsters for fusion material, make your Frightfur Wolf attack 3 or 4 times. Give it the option. So, and if you have a Frightfur Tiger sitting out there as well to boost its attack by 300 attack points, or if you have a Frightfur Sabretooth out there too to boost its attack by 400 points, I mean, it just really adds up and it can help you finish pretty strong. Next, we have a Frightfur Sheep. That's an Edge Imp Chain and 1 Fluffal monster for the fusion. If this card battles, your opponent's cards and effects cannot be activated until the end of the damage step. If this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, or if this card is in your possession, is destroyed by an opponent's card effect and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon this card, and if you do, it gains 800 attack. You can only use this effect of Frightfur Sheep once per turn. And this is the card that you want to leave out there, let it take a beating, it'll only come back stronger. Excellent card, and it's only a level 5, so it works well for that instant fusion card that we talked about earlier. Next, we have a Frightfur Kraken. This card is awesome. It requires 1 Edge Imp monster and 1 Fluffal monster, so not necessarily specific, so King of the Swamp wouldn't be a fusion material that you could use for this. Once per turn, you can target 1 monster your opponent controls and send it to the graveyard. This card cannot attack directly the turn this card is activated. This card can make a second attack during each battle phase. Once per turn at the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, you could change this card to defense position. And it's got a 3000 defense, so really, really great effect. Next, we have probably my favorite here, is the Frightfur Sabretooth. Requires 1 Frightfur Fusion monster and 1 or more Fluffal and or Edge Imp monsters. When this card is fusion summoned, you can target 1 Frightfur monster in your graveyard to special summon it. All Frightfur monsters you control gain 400 attack. If this card was fusion summoned by using 3 or more fusion materials, it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. Really, really good card to have. I love to have this card out there, so like I said, you could really load the field with all these Frightfur monsters. There's also Frightfur Bear, there's also Frightfur Leo, there's a ton of other ones, and you could get endless combinations out on your field as long as as long as the link mechanic doesn't take over just yet. So enjoy it while it lasts, and I know we have to readjust our strategy if you're going to be using these Frightfur and Fluffal cards down the road, but absolutely love this deck. I definitely recommend giving it a shot. It's pretty budget friendly as well. So with that, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.